beheld a farbrengen. Now, in 1968, it was very uncommon that there should be a farbrengen on a day that wasn't already a day where it was all customary to have a farbrengen. Okay, so yes, you always expected, or you knew it was like as if it was scheduled that on certain days, like for example, the week before on Yud Beis Tammuz, the 12th day of Tammuz, there was always a farbrengen, even though it was not, Yud Beis Tammuz could actually be on Shabbos, but those years that it didn't fall out on Shabbos, there was always a farbrengen. It was a scheduled farbrengen, right? And there are various days throughout the year that it's like expected. It's like it's already in the calendar that those days there will be a public farbrengen where the Rebbe will come down and farbreng. Shabbos, by the way, is also a schedule because every Shabbos bevarchim, the Shabbos before the Chodesh, there was already established that Shabbos is a farbrengen, so you knew to expect a farbrengen on that day, and likewise on certain days throughout the week. And then, of course, Yom Tif, there was always farbrengen on Yom Tif, and so on and so forth. When it came to Shabbos, for example, so there were already certain Shabbos when the Rebbe would unexpectedly announce that there will be a farbrengen. It's a very interesting how that worked and so on and so forth. It changed over the years, so I'm not going to get into that. But in middle of the week, it was not common that there should be a farbrengen in the middle of the week if it wasn't on one of those designated days that it was already, so to speak, in the calendar as a day for a farbrengen. It did happen before. As a matter of fact, I think one historic occasion was the farbrengen that happened on the Rebbe's birthday in 1962, in Tafshin Chav Beis. That was to be Yud Aleph Nisan, the 11th day of Nisan, when the Rebbe turned 60. So there was actually a farbrengen, like a unexpected, not unscheduled, let's say, farbrengen on that day. And it did occur, but it wasn't common. So the year before my bar mitzvah, in 1968, the day I turned 12, there was one of these farbrengens in the middle of the week, which you just mentioned. So on the 19th of Tammuz, there was a farbrengen. Now, what happened? So
the day you were bar mitzvah, the Rebbe made a farbrengen?
Well, 1 second. There's more than one reason as to why there was a farbrengen on that day. I always, knew of one reason, which I'll share with you right now. And by the way, there's a certain significance to this because the year later, my older brother Yisrael, was already away in yeshiva. Okay, so when it came to my bar mitzvah, which was, like I said, it was on Shabbos. So my brother Yisrael was giving my parents a hard time. He says he can't come for my bar mitzvah. Why can't he come for my bar mitzvah? Because it's going to be on Yutes Tammuz, on the 19th of Tammuz, right? Which was on Shabbos. But so what's your problem? Why can't you come? Because last year the Rebbe farbreng on Yutes Tammuz. So he's not going to come to bar mitzvah because he's not taking any chances that he might miss a farbrengen again on that year on Tafshin in 1969. He did come at the end, okay, just so you know, so you could relax, okay. So Moshe, you don't have to call my brother Yisrael and give him over his head because he did actually come in the end. And I don't know if he missed the farbrengen or not. I think he may have.
Do you really think I would do that?
No. So what happened? So on Yud Beis Tammuz, which was a very big farbrengen, it was a scheduled farbrengen, and on Yud Beis Tammuz the week before, and like I said, I think I mentioned last week, my nostalgic memories of going to the Rebbe, right? And the very first time that I went to the Rebbe was right before I turned 6 years old, right? And it was in Tammuz. It was actually a little bit before Yud Beis Tammuz. It was for my aunt's wedding on either the 9th or the 10th of Tammuz. I don't remember. So that was the very first time I went to the Rebbe, right? But it's my birthday, and it was my bar mitzvah, and et cetera, et cetera. And throughout the years, that would be when I would go with my father to the Rebbe, like I said, I think I mentioned this last week, it wasn't necessarily every year that I was there for Yud Beis Tammuz, but I do know that over the years, I was several times, my father took me for the Yud Beis Tammuz farbrengen. And then, of course, there was also Simchas Torah, which also happened, was also one of those days where it was more likely, more common, that my father would take me to the Rebbe for those 2 days. So until I left, finally graduated 8th grade here in Pittsburgh, and then I went off to yeshiva in New York, right? So then, of course, I was at every farbrengen. But until then, until I turned, actually I was already 14 years old when I went to yeshiva. So with those 14 years, these were the occasions that were where I most commonly, the most frequently, I would go with my father to the Rebbe. So there's a certain, nostalgia that goes along with that. Now, what had happened at that Yud Beis Tammuz the year before is that the Rebbe mentioned something from the chronicles of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe wrote extensively, right? And he kept a journal of everything he heard from older Chassidim, stories and so on and so forth. And he also in this journal, the Frierdiker Rebbe also included some, even personal things. You could say of all the Rebbes, the 7 Rebbes, from the Alter Rebbe to the Rebbe, the one Rebbe that we know is kind of almost like you could say on an intimate level is the Frierdiker Rebbe. Because the Frierdiker Rebbe, first of all, he was, he wrote mamish, a lot, okay? And he wrote a lot of, some of his personal experiences. So we literally know things that the Frierdiker Rebbe experienced when he was a child in Cheder, right? And his interactions with his teachers, for example, right? We know because the Frierdiker Rebbe shared it with us in his journals, right? So in the Rebbe on Yud Beis Tammuz, the Rebbe was referencing one of these journals of the Frierdiker Rebbe in which he describes his own bar mitzvah in the city of Lubavitch. Many Chassidim gathered in Lubavitch. Then the Rebbe was his father, the Rebbe Rashab. And many Chassidim gathered in Lubavitch to celebrate the bar mitzvah. He was a ben yochid. He was an only son of the Rebbe Rashab. And the Chassidim came and gathered, knowing, of course, that there will be Maimorim. The Rebbe Rashab will say Maimorim, right? Turns out the Rebbe Rashab said 3 Maimorim. And one of the things that the Frierdiker Rebbe actually shared was that his father, the Rebbe Rashab, instructed him to review a Maimer, publicly, like is the custom in Lubavitch, that the bar mitzvah bacher says a Maimer. Okay, I did something I also did, but as a matter of fact, I wasn't always, I was. It was hard for me sometimes, to sit down and to focus. And my father was getting very nervous that I wasn't going to know the Maimer by my bar mitzvah. So I remember when I first started putting on tefillin 2 months before, as is the custom, our custom, that we start putting on tefillin 2 months before. So I remember my father telling me that if I don't know the Maimer by the day I'm supposed to put on my tefillin, right? So he says, we're going to delay. I'm not going to let you put on tefillin until you know the Maimer, right? He was kind of at loss. What am I going to do with this kid? You know what I mean? How am I going to get him to sit down? So he had to use some some method to get me to focus. And Baruch Hashem, it worked. Literally, the night before I pushed the last ois, so the last half of the ois, the last chapter of that Maimer, I sat down, and I wanted to put on tefillin. I don't know if my father would have followed through with the threat. I don't know. He was a pretty gentle, kind person, but he did tell me. He said, before you put on tefillin, you need to know the Maimer. Okay, so Baruch Hashem. And also thanks to Rabbi Ephraim Rosenblum, who helped me, Olav Shalom, who was my bar mitzvah coach. So he helped me with the Parshas Pinchas, and he helped me with the minor. Okay, so what I started to say is that the Frierdiker Rebbe, he writes in this journal, is that the Rebbe Rashab told him to review 2 Maimarim. Imagine. I don't think he had to threaten the Frierdiker Rebbe that he wouldn't allow him to put on tefillin. If I'm not mistaken, I think the Frierdiker Rebbe started putting on tefillin on his 12th birthday. You heard such a thing, Rebbe Chaim? I think the Frierdiker Rebbe actually started putting on tefillin
Yud Aleph Tammuz when he was 11. Yud Aleph Tammuz when he was 11, the day before his 12th birthday.
The day before his birthday. Okay, so
Daddy did it without a bracha, and from the next day, from his 12th birthday, he did it with a bracha.
Okay, so I guess the Rebbe Rashab had more confidence in his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe, that he doesn't have to hold it over his head. But in any case, he gave 3 Maimarim. He instructed the Frierdiker Rebbe to say 3 Maimarim. But then the Frierdiker Rebbe himself writes in this journal, which is interesting, and how much the Frierdiker Rebbe was willing to share things, was that 2 of them he said publicly, and the 3rd Maimer, the Rebbe Rashab told him that he should learn it, but he's learning it for himself. It's not to review publicly, okay? And at some point, the Frierdiker Rebbe shared that as well. Okay.
This it says Yud Tammuz Tavshin Chav Ches. Is that this farbrengen?
Now, what happened at Yud Beis Tammuz Tavshin Chav Ches? I don't know is this the picture of that farbrengen? Oh yeah, it is. Look at that. So at that farbrengen, special farbrengen. It's called special farbrengen, right? Why is it called special farbrengen? Because it was not a scheduled farbrengen. It was the Rebbe, like last minute, the Rebbe announced that there will be a farbrengen. So what had happened, as I started to tell you, is that on Yud Beis Tammuz, the Rebbe was speaking about the journal that the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote about his bar mitzvah. What did the Frierdiker Rebbe write in his bar mitzvah? Write about his bar mitzvah, that the Chassidim came to Lubavitch and they stayed in Lubavitch for a whole week, and they referred to that week as the Sheva Brachas of the Frierdiker Rebbe's bar mitzvah. Okay. Now, Sheva Brachas, of course, is a reference to what we do when we rejoice after a wedding, right? Which is not just a minhag. It's actually deeply rooted, right? From Moshe Rabbeinu even. I mean, we know that sitting Shiva was instituted. We know that goes all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, to mourn for 7 days. So I don't know if it's a mitzvah d'oraisa, although it's connected to mitzvah d'oraisa, as the Rebbe pointed out on occasion. I think it has more the status of what's we call halacha Moshe Sinai, something that was just given over from Moshe without Hashem specifically putting it in the Torah. And I think Sheva Brachas is also somewhat related to that as well. But in any case, so the Chassidim referred to it as the Sheva Brachas of the Frierdiker Rebbe's bar mitzvah, because that's what the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote in his memoirs, and that's what happened that year in Lubavitch, right? That there was this exciting week where the Chassidim farbrengen, for the whole week. I've always wondered what happened on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, though, which is the middle of that week. The 7th, the mitzvah was on the 12th of Tammuz. A week later is the 19th of Tammuz. The 17th of Tammuz happens in between, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Lubavitch was after the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash, even though when you're in Lubavitch, you may not know that, right? But it was, chronologically, on the calendar, it was quite a few years after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So I'm going to assume that they actually fasted on the 17th of Tammuz. I guess it's not a contradiction to have the simcha of the Sheva Brachas of the Frierdiker Rebbe's bar mitzvah simultaneously with the mourning and the fasting of the 17th day of Tammuz. Like I say, I don't know. I don't think the Frierdiker Rebbe in this memoir mentions what happened exactly on that day, right? But we do know that there was a 7-day celebration. Did the Rebbe Shab say a maimer each day of those? That I don't know. Okay. In any case, so that ends on the 19th of Tammuz. So at the Rebbe, at farbrengen of Yud Beis Tammuz, the 12th of Tammuz, the Rebbe said that the Chassidim should celebrate for 7 days. right? In commemoration of the Sheva brachos of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Okay. By the way, I'm named after the Frierdiker Rebbe, but whatever, irrelevant. So what happened that year, Tavshin Chav Ches, 1968, the farbrengen you're looking at in this picture right here, what happened is that there was this farbrengen, right? And I always understood that farbrengen was, and I think that Rebbe even said so, he acknowledged that this is the end of the farbrengen, which is the culmination, the end of the Sheva brachos that he asked the Hasidim to relive, so to speak, of the Frierdiker Rebbe's bar mitzvah. Okay, but then it turned out there was another reason for this farbrengen, and the other reason for the farbrengen, I'm just going to give you a little tickle, as they call it, a little teaser, because I have, Baruch Hashem, this Shabbos, I'm having a very special guest. My very special guest is Mendel Feller from Minnesota, and Mendel Feller is here visiting his son and my daughter in Cranberry, and we invited them to come for Shabbos. So Mendel Feller doesn't know this yet, but I am going to ask Mendel Feller to share the story of that farbrengen of Yutas Tammuz. I'm just going to give you a little teaser that the Rebbe told his father, Rabbi Feller, that one of the reasons that the Rebbe held this farbrengen was in his honor for something that he had done previously on which was actually on the 12th day of Tammuz. In other words, I can't hold myself in, but I'll give you a little bit more of the teaser. And Rabbi Feller wanted very badly to be at the Yud Beis Tammuz farbrengen, right? But he was asked to do a certain shlichus. It was difficult for him to sacrifice being at the farbrengen, but he did it nonetheless. And the Rebbe said, in appreciation for the sacrifice that you made in order to miss the Yud Beis Tammuz farbrengen in favor of doing a very important shlichus, right? So the Rebbe said that I'm going to farbrengen. He held this very special farbrengen on the 19th day of Tammuz. I am going to ask my Mechuten Mendel Feller if at some point in Shabbos I'll get permission, I guess, from Rabbi Roosevelt. I'll ask Rabbi Roosevelt to ask him, maybe at the farbrengen, maybe the Kiddush after davening, to share the story of what was his father's connection with the unexpected surprise farbrengen on the 19th day of Tammuz, Tavshin Chav Ches, which almost caused my bar mitzvah to take place without the presence of my older brother Yosef. Okay, so that's as far as that. So these are the times that we're in. Now, the Kutei Torah, Parshas Pinchas. Okay, so in Parshas Pinchas, one of the mitzvahs in Parshas Pinchas is the mitzvah of what's called the Karban Tamid, right? In the Beis Hamikdash, there was a ongoing daily obligation to bring a special karban, right? That karban was actually divided in two, where part A was done as the very first karban of the day, and part B, that's called the karban tamid shel shachris, and then part B would be the karban tamid shel ben ha'arbayim, which took place in the afternoon, and that karban again was the last. That was the last karban of the day. Okay, and no other karbanos were brought after that karban. So they, in the Beis Hamikdash, they like to do things very efficiently, and they wouldn't push things off. And as soon as they could bring the karban tamid in the afternoon, they would do so. But they always would therefore make sure that whatever other karban would take place, and that would of course be personal karbanos, where if somebody had an obligation to bring a karban to atone for a sin, which is called a karban chatos, or if somebody just wanted to bring a carbon as a donation, and so on and so forth, a carbon nedarim, of which there are many different types. We learned recently in the Rambam. So they would have to, finish all of the kavanos of the day, and only after, at the very end, they would bring the carbon tamid shalbein harabayim. Okay, there's actually one exception, and that would be Erev Pesach, because the one carbon that was brought after the carbon tamid of the afternoon, the daily carbon was then the carbon Pesach. That was an exception. Okay, but other than that, this was what's called the carbon tamid. Carbon tamid means the daily routine. Every single day, they would bring literally every single day, they would bring this carbon. Now on Shabbos and Yom Tov, there was also a mitzvah to bring a carbon, and now it's called the carbon musaf. That's the carbon that's brought in addition to this daily carbon, right? And it's also like continuous, because every Shabbos and every Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh, for that matter, any day that in davening we daven musaf, right? Like we do on Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tov, those are all days where in the Beis Hamikdash they would bring an additional carbon. So it's also kind of like a tamid. It's like a continuous, ongoing routine, right? But not necessarily daily, but every Rosh Shabbos and every Rosh Chodesh, etc., etc. Okay, so this is the carbon tamid. So the Alter Rebbe, actually more than one mimer, the Alter Rebbe references something interesting, which is called a diuk, in the way the words are phrased. That's called a diuk. And what we find is that the pasuk that introduces us to this mitzvah, it's a Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Lemar, right? V'amarta, and you shall say to Bnei Yisrael, right? And then again it repeats in the second pasuk again, V'amarta, and you shall say to Bnei Yisrael, which is unusual. I mean, every mitzvah we find that Hashem told the mitzvah to Moshe, and that Moshe Rabbeinu went on and he taught it to Bnei Yisrael. This time, when Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, he's telling him, Via Marta, and you shall tell them, etc., what that mitzvah is, right? But interestingly, let me just here, I'm going to just look at the pasuk. Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Lemar, Tzav es b'nei Yisrael, command the b'nei Yisrael, and he's about to tell Moshe the mitzvah of this daily carbon that should be done on a daily basis. V'amarta aleihem, and you shall say to them, and he goes on to begin the specifics of the mitzvah. In the next pasuk, right? But the first pasuk is just a very general, doesn't get into the actual specifics. It's just Karbonil Achmet Lishai, there is this carbon that should be brought as an offering, and Reach Lichaychi, and it will be a pleasant aroma. And Tishvu Lahakiliba Meidi, be very careful to bring this carbon in its proper time. Okay? Then, the next pasuk, V'yamar Tolem, and then tell him, and then the pasuk goes on to go into the details of what that carbon should be. And one of the details, which maybe I'll bring it up again later, is that it should be brought from a keves, which is a lamb, okay? Because of the different animals that could be brought, we find that there's par, there's that's beef, that's a cow or whatever, a bull, a cow, that's one species. And the other species would be a keves, which includes also goats and lambs and sheep and so on and so forth. Those were the two main species. Other than the carbonates that were brought from birds, right? These were carbonates that were actually never eaten at all. They were always a carbon oila, which means that the whole thing was burnt on the mizbeach. By the way, the carbon tamid that we're learning about now is also an oila. The kohanim didn't partake in the eating of any part of that. It was all completely burnt for as a sacrifice, as an offering, a complete total offering to Hashem. Okay. Why, in this, when the pasuk continues in the details of this mitzvah, why does it say again v'amarta lahem? So the Alter Rebbe references, and I'm not sure. The source is not from the Alter Rebbe, but the Alter Rebbe references. I think it's a reference to some other source, that the reason why it says twice v'amarta is to allude to something very interesting. What do we know? These karbonos could only be brought in the Beis Hamikdash. We cannot bring these karbonos anymore, right? And in their davening, when we mention these karbonos, we ask Hashem that we should bring back the Beis Hamikdash. And one of the things we say in various places in the davening is that we should be able to go back to bringing the carbon, the daily carbon, the carbon tamid that will take place every single day. Okay, so without the Beis Hamikdash, obviously we cannot bring this carbon. By the way, this is also an exception with the carbon Pesach because it's a complicated topic, but the carbon Pesach, technically, I think it could also be brought without the Beis Hamikdash, but that's a whole different subject. Okay. Yeah, it definitely could, because I remember after the 6-Day War, there was this halachic debate, probably not just amongst one or two rabbanim, or many rabbanim, but the one I'm aware of is that there was a letters going up and back between the Rebbe and one of the great scholars in Israel at the time, Rabbi Yosef Zevin, who happened to also be a Lubavitcher Chassid, but he was very popular in Eretz Yisrael. He is actually the one who began the project of what's called the Encyclopedia Talmudis, very much encouraged by the Rebbe. He was a Chassid, and he was a Lubavitcher Chassid, absolutely. I know, there's another one of the great Rabbonim, the Rogachover, right? The Rogachover was also a Lubavitcher Chassid, but the Rogachover was so big, right, that you can't just like put him into the description, just call him a Lubavitcher Chassid. He was just so big, right? Rabbi Zevin was also great master, accomplished great things. I don't intellectually, if I may say, no one comes to the level of the Rogachover. Right? No one. The Rogachover is like stands apart and stands alone. Okay. And this is well recognized. By the way, my wife gave a speech at the Kiddush HaShluchim, Kiddush HaMechanchos. The women have a annual. I'm going so off the topic now, so make sure, Chaim, that I get back on the topic. But this is something that my wife shared in her speech. She gave a speech at the Kiddush HaMechanchos, and she told the story of the Rogachover, right? Now, when you say the Rogachover, anybody who's familiar, okay, Rogachover, okay, he's a completely, totally different category. There's no one else in the category of the Rogachover. It's pretty much well accepted, okay? By Chassidim, non-Chassidim, the Litvische, the Tzvardim, everybody, right? The Rogachover was this unique individual who lived in but the Rebbe was the Rebbe had met with the Rogachover, and there was a time that they both lived in the same city in the 1930s in Leningrad, as it was called then, or Petersburg, as it was called then, St. Petersburg. But in any case, the Rogachover, there's a story that when the Rogachover was a child in Cheder, he couldn't sit still in Cheder. This is why my wife is telling me the story to teachers, right, at this convention for the mechanchos, the educators, the women educators. So there he is, the picture of the Rogachover. He even looked different, right? They say he couldn't. Interestingly, did I talk about him last week? Because we said, we talked about Shabbos.
He spoke about him. He said it was
Rabbi Teitz actually knew the Rogachover, right? And Rabbi Teitz came to be Menachem Ovel, the Rebbe, after the passing of Rebbe Tzvi Chamadin. So the Rebbe used the occasion of Rabbi Teitz coming to be Menachem Ovel, him, right, in the Rebbe's home, to speak about the Rogachover. And the Rebbe wanted to know if Rabbi Teitz knew any inside information as to why the Rogachover never took a haircut. There are different theories as to what it was. One of the theories that was pretty much rejected by Rabbi Teitz, and I guess the Rebbe as well, that it had nothing to do with Nazirus. It had nothing to do with because he took upon himself to be a Nazir. By the way, halachically, you can accept upon yourself Nazirus, but you're getting really stuck because you can't undo Nazirus. Because to undo Nazirus, there's a procedure that has to take place only in the Beis Hamikdash and Kavanas and so on and so forth. So you could become a Nazir, but you cannot uncome You cannot unbecome a Nazir, right? But that apparently is one of the theories that is not very popular as far as the Rogachover. There is one about his daughter who said that he had a certain sensory sensitivity, whatever, and it was much painful for him. It was much painful, which is interesting because you know that the hair is the closest thing to the brain. But when you want to talk about this idea of tzimtzum, how the great lights of Hashem actually reduce themselves and contract, right? Right? It's the light of Hashem, and they contract, in this, the infinite, levels of dissension, right? So the Syros is giving us an example because it's closest to the brain, but it has the least connection to the brain, right? There are no nerve endings in the hair, and that's why you can cut hair. So they say that by the Rogachover, there was lacking that tzimtzum. So if you would cut his hair, it push it, he would push it, he would be in pain. It would be like for you cutting off your fingers. Whatever. That's just another one of the theories that are given. But in any case, when this Rogachover that you're looking at here was a child in Cheder, he couldn't sit still, right? And he would run out of the class, right? And he would climb up into a tree, but he would take with him a sefer up into the tree, and he would learn in the tree. So the story goes is that the teacher didn't know what to do with him. So what the teacher decided to do is he climbed up on the tree and he sat and he learned with the Rogachover in the tree. This was the story that my wife told about a lesson for chinuch. The Rogachover said, whether it's 100% true or not, but in the story, as the story goes, the Rogachover says if it wasn't for that devotion, right, of the teacher climbing up, not screaming at him while you're running out of class, not screaming at him for climbing up the tree and learning up in the tree, but rather went up on the tree, climbed up the tree, and he learned with him. Said the Rogachover, I don't know if I would have developed my love for learning if not for what that teacher demonstrated to me when I was in Cheder. Okay, so that was my wife's speech about the Rogachover. But in any case, now you have to get me back on track, Chaim. How did I get to the Rogachover? So
Rabbi Zevin, Rabbi.
You're right. So okay. But in any case, Rabbi Zevin had this debate with the Rebbe about the Korban Pesach after the 6-day war when they actually recaptured the Harabayis, right? So the Rebbe wanted to say that you now have a chiyuv to bring the Korban Pesach because you could bring the Korban Pesach because the Korban Pesach is not contingent on having the Beis Hamikdash, right? But whatever. It turned out that unfortunately the Rebbe in one of the letters says that as optimistic as I was, that we actually could bring the Korban Pesach, but we're restricted for other reasons because of being tahar, we can't make ourselves properly tahar to do so, right? So therefore, the Rebbe says it's best that you not be present in Yerushalayim on the Erev Pesach, right? But then the Rebbe actually, because the situation had changed, the Rebbe said that we're going back to the original because, unfortunately, up until the 6-day war, we couldn't bring a korban because the Jordanians wouldn't let us get near the place of the Beis Hamikdash, right? He says, now, unfortunately, the government of Israel itself doesn't allow it. So the bottom line is that even if you want to bring a korban Pesach, the Prime Minister of Israel or the Justice Department of Israel, whoever it may be, whoever's running that country, right, wouldn't let you anyway. So because you don't want to provoke the Palestinians or whatever, the imam who's in charge, whatever. So bottom line, so we can't bring korban. But the korban Talmud, we can't bring, right? No Beis Hamikdash, no korban Talmud. Says the Alter Rebbe, this is why the pasuk says v'amarta twice. Why twice? One is for the basic mitzvah, right? Tell them how to bring the korban Pesach. But then he says again v'amarta. Why does he say again v'amarta? What's this line? Why does he say again v'amarta?
Someone who's a Nazir today.
See, he's stuck. He can't un-Nazir himself.
Yeah.
Why? Unless when the Mashiach comes, then he'll be able to un-Nazir himself if he wants to. So, why does it say again v'amarta? Says the Alter Rebbe, this alludes to the fact that the korban tamid can be brought today as well. However, in a different form, As the Gemara itself says, "Tfilos keneged karbonos tiknum." This idea of davening every day, which, by the way, it seems to be so fundamental, but it's not so fundamental, because this whole concept of this routine of davening every single day was, first of all, instituted before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed by the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah in the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. And in my famous lecture on the difference between the era of the first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash, when you hear that lecture, you'll understand why. Those who heard the lecture understand why, because davening comes from a certain kind of a mental state, which in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash was natural to people. People knew how to speak to Hashem. So there was always a mitzvah of davening. Let me take that back. There was always a mitzvah of davening, but it was a very personal thing, and everybody would daven the way he would daven, right? Which, by the way, is still a very important element that is supposed to be part of our davening. So when the Rambam describes the mitzvah, the fundamental mitzvah of davening, he begins by saying that every Jew has a obligation that if he needs something, levakesh tzirachov from Hashem. You have to ask and turn to Hashem to ask for your needs. That's the fundamental nekuda of davening, which is a mitzvah de'oraisa. It's a mitzvah from the Torah. Right? Yes? Somebody have a question? So there's a fundamental mitzvah from the fundamental. I mean, it's a mitzvah de'oraisa, right? The Torah, it's one of the 630 mitzvahs that you have to daven. But the davening in its original form was that levakish tzirachov. It's an extension of the mitzvah of Amunah, right? And the person, by asking Hashem, it's basically he is demonstrating, he's showing that he believes that all of his needs can be provided from only one place, and that is from Hashem himself. Okay? So that's the fundamental mitzvah of davening. Now, people had to daven, right? But they lost the art of speaking to Hashem. In the first Beis Hamikdash, it became natural. People knew how to talk to Hashem. Came in the second Beis Hamikdash, there's no prophecy. Even the Beis Hamikdash was lacking, certain of the miraculous elements that were present in the first Beis Hamikdash. And the Chalal society had shifted dramatically. As I point out that lahavdil, this is the beginning of what we call in secular history, this is the beginning of modern civilization, right? Founded by the great philosophers of Greece, Socrates and Aristotle, and all of the government systems as we know today, including both democratic systems and socialist systems and even whatever, right? They're all rooted in the principles that were basically established by the great Greek philosophers, okay? So we're just a continuation, modification here and there, little evolution, a little modification, a little adjusting, whatever. But basically, this is how historians look at our civilization, as the modern civilization has its roots, it has its humble beginnings in the times of the Greek philosophers, which coincides with the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. And I, in my famous lecture, I put the two together. I said it's also the beginning of modern Judaism, right? In order to illustrate that, I say that if you could go to a time machine and pop you back into the first Beis Hamikdash, it would be so strange you wouldn't know where you are. You wouldn't know how to handle it. Besides the fact that, I don't know, if they didn't wear pants and shirts, they wore something else, whatever. So you feel so out of place. But in any case, if they pop you back to the second Beis Hamikdash, you'll be able to relate a lot better, because the things that they were doing as their Yiddishkeit are all the things that we are so familiar with, like wearing a yarmulke, and yarmulke maybe goes back even further, but just something that we all take to be so routine, right? In our Yiddishkeit, who's davening every day, davening with Hanusach, we open a siddur, we all have the same siddur, mostly, for the most part. Right? There are variances between Ashkenaz and Sfarad and so on and so forth. But basically, it's the brachas before Krishma, the bracha after Krishma, Shemona Esrei, and then at some point was added a lot of the Psalms of David HaMelech from Tehillim, which we call Psukei de Zimra, before we get to the brachas of Krishma and so on. It's all basically a routine that's been going on for over 2,000 years from the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. These tefillos that we have as a routine, right? Routine. That's the key word. That's our carbon tamid today. That's our carbon tamid. We don't have a Beis Hamikdash. We can't bring the actual carbon of this lamb, right? But we do have something that is ongoing, continuous, and routine. Tamid. Every day. Get up in the morning, we daven Shachis, in the afternoon we daven Mincha, and then we daven Ma'ariv, right? So much so that unfortunately, very unfortunately, it became a little too routine, right? And sometimes we just say the words, and we're not even focusing on the words, okay? Says the Alter Rebbe, oh, this is what it means that this is our carbon for today. This is our carbon. What is our carbon? We can't do, and why there's the second V'amarta. The second V'amarta is to tell us that we still have to every day bring a carbon, right? And we can't do it in the literal sense. So he says, mitzvahs, says the Alter Rebbe, are done on many levels. Most mitzvahs, true, are done with maisa, with action. When it comes to the maisa, the act of doing the mitzvah of the carbon tamid, we can't do it the way it's described in today's parsha. We cannot bring the keves, we cannot bring the lamb, right? We can't bring the lamb because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. But, says the Alter Rebbe, mitzvah also addresses the other two forms of our action and behavior. And what are they? Machshava and dibur. Our mind, our focusing, our meditation, and our dibur, and how we express ourselves, right? Says the Alter Rebbe, this is the tamid of today until Mashiach comes, and we will go back to having the full tamid. The tamid of the day is that it's a routine. With sometimes, there's a certain danger in routine, but it's a routine. And it's up to you to struggle to make it less routine, less of a rote, and more meaningful. But if you understand that it's not just about dibur, because dibur means expressing yourself, right? But unfortunately, dibur could also be and you're just saying words, right? And you don't even know what you're saying. The avodah of the carbon tamid today, which is performed through tefillah, is primarily not maisa. We can't do the maisa. It's machshava and dibur, and even more than dibur, because dibur also is more a maisa thing. And proof is that you could do dibur and not even know what you're saying, right? You have blah 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 blah, right? Machshava, no. You can't fake machshava. You know what I mean? You can't just do machshava. Machshava is intimate. Machshava is real. It's actually what you're experiencing, what you're thinking. Our avodah every single day is to bring a carbon. Where do we bring that carbon? Yes, the Al-Chiknesas Agdela for us formulated a siddur with words that we're supposed to say. But the real carbon is that you sacrifice your mind by redirecting it from whatever. If you're depressed because your sports team they lost whatever, the World Series or whatever, right? And you can't find, your mind is so preoccupied because you happen to also bet a lot of money on the game, right? And your mind is so preoccupied. Now it's time to be in a carbon. It's the carbon. Sacrifice all of that and work on refocusing your mind on dedicating yourself to Hashem. Okay? So this is the carbon tamid. It's a carbon that has every single day. We have to literally take time to disconnect ourselves from all the things that are just happening by themselves, right? Most of our machshava is just nadishkeit that goes automatic. It's an automatic pilot, right? Take hold of it, grab it, right? And bring a korban. Take that mind of yours that, by the way, is talking in the words of davening, and make sure there's a connection between the words that you're saying and the machshava, the understanding, and actually feeling and experiencing the words that you are saying. That's a korban, my dear friends. That's a real korban, right? And that's what it's meant, that every day, in the morning, we have the korban tamid shel Shochet. Then in the afternoon, we come home from work, we go around and we daven mincha. That's the korban tamid shel Habayim. What are we doing in those moments of davening? We're not just simply saying these words, which Baruch Hashem we have, because we are not capable. We don't have the art of articulating words of davening. So the Anshik Nesas Agdela took care of it for us, but they never meant for us to just mumble those words. They meant for us to actually have some kavanah, and this is the idea. This is the practice of davening. The practice of davening is to separate yourself from everything else and apply your machshava and dibur to the words that you find in your siddur. Okay, this has to happen on a daily basis, right? And that continues to happen today. So when Hashem told us to bring the korban tamid, He said twice via Marta. He said when there's a Beis Hamikdash, you can actually bring the korban, but when there's no Beis Hamikdash, via Marta, tell them they still have to bring this korban. And this korban has to become part of their absolute daily routine. And they will bring the korban, maybe not with just Maisa. The Maisa part will be the words that you say, but it has to also include your machshava, your mind, where you have to literally go through this exercise of separating your mind from the places where it just kind of like flows effortlessly. Put the dam, stop it, and say, "Dam, Chaim, please don't get it's a thing that holds water back." Okay, DAM, and dam the flow of your thoughts and get them focused into the words that are in front of you in the siddur. That's your korban. That's your sacrifice that you do today. Just very quickly, I said about the fact that the korban has to be when you get to the specification of the korban. So the mitzvah is that it should be rafa makeves from a lamb. And the Alter Rebbe, in a different mimer, and this week in Parshas Pinchas, the Alter Rebbe references the fact that there's other kinds of korbanos, other animals, right? Like I mentioned in the beginning. There's also par. There's the bovine. No, bovine includes, I think, all of them. But there's the whatever, the big one. The bulls, the cows, right? As opposed to the docile, gentle lamb. Okay. The korban tamid, says the Alter Rebbe, is specifically from a lamb. And it doesn't directly connect with what we were said up until now, but it does connect to something that we spoke about last week. Okay, so this is actually a shiur in its own, but just I found it so interesting, and we have a couple minutes. I want to share it with you. We spoke about last week, as we have done many, many times, the difference between a tzaddik and a baal teshuva, right? The tzaddik is the perfect person. Not only is he in total control, but he has eliminated all improper temptation and so on and so forth. And his only desire is just to continue to be connected and one with Hashem. Okay? No distractions, right? Whatever natural distractions are, the tzaddik either who is born, right, with such a holy neshama that he doesn't have these distractions, or somehow he actually managed to achieve that level. But he didn't achieve it on his own because he can never get to that level unless Hashem grants it to you. It's a matana that the tzaddik gets from Hashem. The rest of us, we have to struggle, right? And things don't come natural to us, right? Because we happen to have an Shabbamis. And our whole life is spent, by the way, just, constantly battling meaning never letting down your guard and always having to somehow prevail over these natural, instinctive, whatever it is that we have. Okay. Who has more passion, guys? The tzaddik or the Baal Tshuva? Well, the Gemara tells us that in a place where the Baal Tshuva stands, even the tzaddik can't stand. And what's the reason? Because it's b'cheilo yatir. The Baal Tshuva demonstrates passion. Because the only way that you can win the war with your Nefesh Habamis is you have to somehow arouse within you a fighting, what's the word? A passion, okay? Interestingly, if you look at animals, which one has more passion? The ox, the shar, right? The bull, or the lamb? No, a lamb, docile, this and that. The Alter Rebbe. The par is the Baal Tshuva, right? He's not the tzaddik, he's the Baal Tshuva. And that's why he's all full of passion, right? And that's why when you see somebody and he's not behaving, you tell him, Oi, Zainish king lamb. Don't be a lamb. What do you tell him? Zainish king behemoth, Zainish king ox. Stop acting like an ox, like a bull, right? You never scream at somebody and tell them, oh, stop being. Yeah, sometimes you do, because sometimes people, being that they're a lemala, meaning they're a little bit, and they don't know how to show passion, right? So you have to scream at him too. But the bottom line is, the power is more associated with the Baal Tshuva, right? The guy who's struggling through life, and the lamb represents the tzaddik. Wait, one second. This carbon, which is the daily carbon, which is the routine, says the Alter Rebbe, is brought specifically from the lamb. Why the lamb? We just finished discussing how davening is a battle, right? And you have to make that the Gemara calls it. It says Eis Tzelusa is Eis Kirva, right? Or something like that. Davening is a battle. What are you battling? You're battling your Nefesh Habamis, right? And you spend this time every day trying to stay focused, right? Rather than to just, go with the flow of your Nefesh Habamis, right? So why is it that this carbon tamid, which today is replaced by davening, what is this carbon tamid? Why is it a dafka lamb, which represents a tzaddik? And here the Alter Rebbe makes a very, very important points out something very important, and we did touch upon it last year. You can't have a Baal Tshuva if you don't have a tzaddik. Just simply said, a Baal Tshuva is always striving to something, right? Well, what is he striving to? He's striving to this thing called tzaddik. Why are you a Baal Tshuva? Because it didn't come to you naturally, and you have to constantly battle to it, right? So here the Alter Rebbe says, one second, Baal Tshuva is great, but you can't say, I want to be a Baal Tshuva. If a Baal Tshuva says, I want to be a Baal Tshuva, you're never going to get anywhere, right? Because in order to want to be a Baal Tshuva, it means I want to deviate and then come back. No, God forbid. You don't want to deviate. If you want to deviate, you have a problem. I want to be a tzaddik. For me to be a tzaddik, it's going to take some extra oomph, some chela yatir, some extra strength, extra passion, and I'm going to get there. What's the baseline, though? What's even the Baal Tshuva struggling for? I want to be like the tzaddik, right? I'm going to be recognized. When when Mashiach comes, Mashiach's going to say, tzaddik, 1 second, where's your passion? I see all these Bali Tshuva, they're so full of passion. Where's yours? So Mashiach is going to have to teach the tzaddikim how to develop the passion of the Bal Tshuva. That's what the Zayar. That one of the things Mashiach is going to accomplish is also Lasovet Tzadikaya B'ti Yufta. He's going to teach the tzaddikim to have the passion of the Bal Tshuva, right? So he could be on their level in that sense. But in the meantime, if that Bal Tshuva doesn't see as his baseline, if he doesn't see as what's the most continuous, what's the continuum, what's the drive every single day, what is the drive of the Baal Tshuva? Dafke the tzaddik, the keves. Every day remind yourself, you're only going to win this struggle if you look up to the tzaddik, right, and want to be like him, and even more so, discover that there is this continuum, there's this state of tzaddik that actually exists within your own self. When you are davening, it's not about trying to be somebody else. It's about trying to find that element of the tzaddik and struggle to connect to that. So that is why davening is also a time where you try to totally disconnect from everything, even the external elements of your own being, and come to a state of fullness with the true essence of your being, which is indeed the baseline of every Jew, and that is tzaddik. And that's why the Korban Tamid, every day, it's about remembering that baseline. The keppus. That's what I have to share with you today, everybody. My hope is that from this point and on, as wonderful as your davening may have been, let it please go up a notch, because after all, that's the whole point of spending